Welcome to NewYorkBIO's virtual breakfast series, a digital program started in 2020, bringing you fireside chats with leaders from across the healthcare spectrum. This week's episode is a JP Morgan preview with Doug MacDougall and Kari Watson, founders of MacDougall Biocom.
All right, folks. Good morning, everybody. I have 9:01, so we'll get started. My name is Jennifer Hawks Bland, and I'm the CEO at NewYorkBIO. And as always, we're thrilled to welcome you to our virtual breakfast series. Today, we're going to have the pleasure of talking with Kari and Doug from MacDougall Communications. And so we're going to talk all things JP Morgan advanced strategy, what's known and unknown. Probably a little more unknown than maybe we were just like 4 days ago. A special thank you to our partners at Iser Amper for sponsoring this month's series of breakfast discussions. And on a programming note, you all know, especially the frequent joiners, that from time to time we have different programming things that we are telling you about. Next Monday for NewYorkBIO members, we're having our holiday reception down at the New York Stock Exchange, and it follows a day of emerging biotech companies presentations that we're doing in partnership with the New York Stock Exchange. So we hope you'll be able to join us either in person for the reception or virtually for the showcase. So look for emails and information from us. We've been able to add a virtual option for those who want to listen to the company presentations via streaming. So look for that later, right, Derek, later today?
Yep,
okay.
We should have it later this morning.
All right, sounds good. So with that, I will turn it over to Derek to kick off our discussion with Kari and Doug this morning. Thanks.
All right. Thank you so much, Jennifer. Kari and Doug, it is absolutely wonderful to have you here. I've known both of you for quite some time, and I think just about everybody in the industry knows who you are. We do like to kick off this program with a little bit of an origin story. And why don't we do that first? So I think people in many ways, associate MacDougall with almost everything communications, but in a lot of ways we associate it with JP Morgan because you ended up managing to be the people that send out the calendar of events every year and organize everything. So you're known far and wide, but why don't you tell us a little bit about how MacDougall came to be in the first place?
Kari, do you want to take that one?
It really came out of Doug and I reconnecting. We met each other at Feinstein Keene Healthcare now, which is now part of Ogilvy, and we had worked together for a number of years there, and were networking and talking about sort of next career moves for ourselves. And Doug had been consulting a little bit. He was a CFO. I was young in my career, really only 3.5, 4 years in out of college, and he was thinking about starting something on his own. And those brainstorming sessions were the start of MacDougall. And it really all came down to, wanting to be able to work directly with the entrepreneurs who are starting biotech companies, and just really loving, having a hand in helping companies with their positioning and messaging, and, being able to work from the very beginning. And then over the last 20 years, growing MacDougall to be able to work with companies from that very beginning stage all the way up through commercialized public companies. So it's been It's been a great 20 years.
Yeah, we have 20 years coming up, I think, February.
Well, congratulations. That's an amazing milestone. Yeah. That's pretty incredible. And so, now it's the week after Thanksgiving. And, in my mind, at least, this marks the time in the calendar where you're looking ahead to JP Morgan. You've set up a good chunk of your calendar, and then your calendar is going to change again. And it's just that time where kind of everything is happening between now and the end of the year. And, finally you end up in San Francisco after New Year's. So I thought it would be fun to kind of have you guys talk a little bit about, maybe the evolution of, your involvement in the conference, and, some of the things you've seen really, I guess, over the last 20 years about how it's become more and more important to the industry.
Yeah, I will tell you, the conference has been great for me personally on to career basis, at least. I think my first year there was 1994 at that conference, and I've been to every one since. It was back then H&Q, and then moved to JP Morgan H&Q, and Chase JP Morgan, and all those other things. But actually that first year, and this is actually a really good recommendation for people for networking, even if you're new in the industry. I met some pretty junior people at the time, you know, including Francesco at Index and stuff. It was like his first JP Morgan. And I met, you know, a pile of people who are now CEOs of major pharma and biotech who were just getting into the industry back then. And I will tell you that it was really, as I tell my employees all the time, is meet your peers. You don't need to get to know the CEOs in the industry because they're not going to be around when you are, you know, a lot more, but meet the people that are the peers. And it was just amazing how I had, you know, drinks and champagne with some people that was their first year ever, and they've become really close friends because it was their first year at JP Morgan. Now, it was just it's a great evolution that's happened over the years, and is a great place for networking from that perspective. So that's kind of my history of the conference. I think we as a firm, the first thing we did is we've done very little marketing as a firm, but the first thing that we did to market was develop the conference calendar, our actual conference calendar that comes out every quarter that has all the industry events, both biotech, networking events, investor events, partnering events, and medical meetings. And that was kind of our only marketing. And then once JP Morgan came around, I think it was probably 2003 was our first time that we did the conference calendar, was that everybody was asking where to go for the parties. So we were the first one to develop that as well. And a lot of that came from the network that I built in the 90s of people who are, you know, now working at the pharma companies and the investor firms and things like that, who I can make phone calls on and find out, you know, what parties are you going to and what parties you have. And then plus we have like 45 clients that may be going there, and they give us their list of companies that have parties that they got invited to. So that's kind of the evolution of the list. I believe there's now two other copycats out there for our list, which is fine, you know, I think, but that's the evolution of the list. And those are really the only two marketing things we've ever done with our firm. And yeah, it's kind of fun.
Well, I just put the conference calendar into the chat, and if anybody doesn't use it, you should. It's actually, you know, as we think about the kind of events that we want to do as New York Bio, quite honestly, a lot of times when we're thinking about things a year or so ahead, you know, it's really kind of the go-to calendar for me, because I look at the calendar and I look at what else might be happening on any of the weeks that's there, and we said, well, we don't want to run into any of these things. It's actually an invaluable resource.
Yeah,
and from the JP Morgan.
We check it before as we're scheduling, particularly our large events, right? Where we draw from particularly a Boston audience as well.
Yeah, and I mean that was the origin, right? I mean, we, you know, ended up marketing it and realized the value of it, but it was because we had to do that, you know, research and you know, understanding of what's happening across the industry ourselves, and realized as we gathered all of that information that it was a really valuable resource, first to our clients, and then realized it was something that we would want to share more broadly, and we've kept it up ever since.
We need to make sure that the New York Bio and other state bio hosted reception is on your JP Morgan calendar, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
When is your
it had to be on 2 pages, so we actually took off conferences that we thought were not as valuable. So one of the things that we did was actually evaluated these conferences too for our clients by talking to people at them. And so some clients things would dump off, and I'd get an earful from those people. But now that we've opened it up more online, we're adding most of the stuff there. But we do vet some of the events as well.
And for the JP Morgan version, I think, Derek, you were going to ask, when is it coming?
Yeah.
We're compiling it now. We usually debut it, soon, so early December.
Yeah.
So, definitely, still gathering information. As things are quite fluid. And we'll put up a first version and advertise that on our social channels. And to those of us who've requested to receive an email from us, we'll get an email through our constant contact distribution, probably in another week or two. And then we'll keep it updated online right up until the conference.
But you guys should be aware, and this is something for next topic, is it's going to be very small.
You think so?
Yeah.
Yes, we
Yeah. So
know
let's actually talk about that. I mean, it's usually enormous. There's crowds of people everywhere. I imagine this isn't going to impact prices, but yeah. So what are you hearing about it for this year? So we heard there was a rumor that it was going to be virtual. I think we can probably squash that, but let's get the load on what you're hearing for this year. What do we think it's going to be like?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I will say, from trying to organize events for a couple of clients, people are holding events. It's, very hard to find a space right now if you want to host a dinner, Monday night, Tuesday night. Things are not completely booked, but quite booked up. I think the events are going to be, in terms of networking, I think they're going to be a lot more smaller private dinners and like the 20 to 30 person numbers versus the big all-comer receptions that, we kind of know and love from JP Morgan's in the past. So I think, but it looks like, just based on sort of booking availability between, unfortunately, the number of restaurants that are, permanently or temporarily closed.
Yeah.
And then, the ones that are already booked, there's, it looks like there will be things happening, but in terms of the broader, networking opportunities, I think there won't be as much going on in the evenings if, you're not part of one of those private dinners.
it's going to be very exclusive. None of the Cooley events and Goodwin and big parties are going to happen. So you're going to need really invitations, and you're not going to be able to walk in the door on probably any of these events because they'll probably have, as Kari said, tables of 15 or 20 people for dinner. I know some of the banks are doing some events. ETIG seems to be talking about their event, but some of the other banks will have small ones. But the banks are sending half the crowds that they normally would as well. Pharma is probably 50-50 of actually doing everything virtual versus sending people. But when they are sending people, again, it's about half the amount. I even know that Pfizer still doesn't even know whether they're going or not. There's some companies, they may be sending out a small contingent, but they're all sitting back and waiting. There's still flights and still good seats on the flights out there, which is a real kind of canary in the coal mine for me in doing that. The prices are coming down a little bit. They're still astronomical, but it's going to be 50% of the people. I'd love to hear comments from the audience of whether they've heard certain things as well. But some of the rules that I've heard is that the Westin St. Francis, you can actually get a room right now. If you go online, it's still like $5,000 or $6,000, but it's not $10,000.
Right.
Okay.
Bargains to be had
all
anyway.
Relative, Doug. All relative.
What a great
the city
deal.
does have a 50% capacity rule. So that there only half the people can be in these hotels. So that's going to reduce the amount of invites that people get on this. I don't know if anybody's heard, and I'd love to hear from the people out there if they've heard. But someone told me that maybe that the private company presentations are going to be virtual, and the public company presentations will be in person, so that the old what are those rooms in the back? Not the California room, but those 4 rooms in the back there that have private companies. That may be a way that they're reducing it, but I'd love to hear if somebody can confirm that rumor.
I can confirm the plane ticket prices, because I bought my ticket maybe like 2 weeks ago, and I think I paid $350 nonstop Delta JFK to SFO. And I was like, that made me, I was like, that's a little weird.
Yeah. And were you able to get a seat, an aisle or seat, window
Yeah.
seat?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think that was it. Yeah, I think, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So
For sure.
I was like, oh, this is a little
Yeah.
weird. And
Yeah.
at that price, it
So-
doesn't, I mean, at that price you can, right? Like you'll use that credit at some point, right? So it's not like you're spending 2,000 and then you're like, oh gosh, I don't know whether to buy or not. So.
Yeah. So my
So why don't we
private here, someone said my private company is presenting at JP Morgan in person. That's great to know.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Good to know.
Sure.
Thank you, Kimberly. So why don't we do this? We have a couple of other things that we'll get to. People can fill things in the chat. We'll do a little bit of a roundup in a couple minutes. So let's think about this year. So let's talk a little bit about best practices, right? So imagine you're an early stage company this year. You're going to go to JP Morgan, and I'll say JP Morgan to denote the whole week, right? So you're going to go out. If I'm an early stage company and I'm talking to you, what are some of the things that we've done over the last month, and what are some of the things that I'm thinking about now?
I mean, I think particularly this year, but really it's any year, you need to start with why are you going? What's your purpose of being there? And being very intentional about planning your time there. So, I think the, companies that we've worked with that, I've heard frustration about the event are the ones that kind of just go to, see who they're going to run into and see what's going to, kind of come out of it without a real plan. I think planning ahead of time is going to be really important this year. Think about, who it is that you need that FaceTime with, and reach out to them now if you haven't already, because a lot of companies have already scheduled their meetings. They were working on that before Thanksgiving. So thinking about who you want to meet with individually, and then thinking about, what it is, that you're trying to communicate. Is it, an investor audience primarily? Is it a business development audience? And taking the time between now and January to really step back, look at your presentation, and make sure that your presentation is up to date, telling the right story, and tuned for the audience that you're going to be meeting with.
Yep.
And I agree with Kari 100%. You need to be flexible. I would not set up meeting rooms and spaces yet. I would just do it based on your calendar and trying to get to people, and the meeting is TBD. And because some of these investors still are on the fence and might end up being virtual at the end of the day, and you may end up being virtual at the end of the day if this virus becomes a problem. So set things up with all TBD as far as meetings are concerned, but be very deliberate, as Kari said. I would also be prepared to do everything virtually, and that means really practicing your presentation online and having your script out there, because you have the opportunity to do online stuff, is to have a script next to you so that you can really go through your presentation. If you have a half-hour meeting, you want to get it done in 12 minutes, because Q&A is where the deal is sold. So you want to really kind of script that out as well. So when you're talking to people, you're not utilizing that half hour, and at the end of the half hour, there's nothing to talk about, because that's where the deal's sold. So and refresh your slideshow. Sometimes you get bored with it. We have dozens of slideshow before JP Morgan of clients that just say, I'm bored with my slideshow. And if you're bored with your slideshow, then the investors will be bored too.
Yeah, it's going to show.
Right? Yeah.
It's going to show.
I would also say, just given the fluidity of things and the mix between virtual and in-person meetings, I think one of the things that we're hearing is, again, you really have to have that, need to see somebody in person now. Particularly Wall Street has learned that, for a lot of these introductory meetings, that they can do those very effectively virtually. So I would not recommend prioritizing those kinds of meetings for this week, right? This JP Morgan week. Those are meetings that you can schedule virtually anytime, and investors are very open to that. So again, be really thoughtful about, who it is that you need to meet with, connect with in person. Do you have, kind of key shareholders that, are not local to you, and that, this time of year, this meeting place is going to be worthwhile for connecting with them. And I'm hearing a lot more of like, using the week for business development to the degree that, the pharma companies and other companies that you want to meet with are going to be there. That's definitely a challenge in terms of the unknowns.
Yeah.
One other question that made me think about it. Should people be preparing to end up with some sort of best case scenario hybrid situation where they're bouncing between in-person and Zoom meetings while they're in San Francisco?
Yes. Yes.
Absolutely.
I would say yes, and
sit down with your laptop.
if you can optimize your time for that, try not to have like an in-person meeting and then run back to your room and do a virtual meeting. We've had some folks say that they're kind of doing in-person meetings like Monday, and then Tuesday morning, and then some virtual meeting before they get, head back to the airport, kind of thing. So try to block your schedule so you're not killing yourself. That week is always a lot, no matter how you're doing it.
Don't try to end up on Zoom in the lobby of the Hilton.
No.
Right.
Well, that's another thing I was just thinking of, right? I think one, especially now, we never really had to think about this before, but one piece of best practices is get comfortable with where you're going to do your virtual meetings.
Yeah.
And, and basically set it up beforehand for your, best case, if it's your hotel room, if it's wherever it is, but set up your background, get your stuff set up so you're not messing around with things to try and do it last minute. There's always, there's always the last minute something. So, I remember, way back when, one of the things that I did was I always had a set of like 5 or 6 slides loaded onto an iPad. So even if I saw somebody either on the street or we sat down and grabbed a cup of coffee or something, it was much easier than pulling out a laptop or setting anything up.
Mm-hmm.
Just basically setting yourself up to be flexible, especially now, is super beneficial. And from what you said before, I would say that if there are people that you genuinely want to meet and get FaceTime with outside of a presentation environment, I think kind of latching on to a couple of evening things early and, making sure you have kind of a set plan rather than the usual, I'm going to go to these 4 receptions on Wednesday. It probably behooves you to try and do that now and at least have, something anchoring your evening calendar every day.
Yep, absolutely. I'm also hearing people, thinking about things like, scheduling a round of golf, like before the meeting, kind of a lot of the outdoor things, going for walks, going for runs, playing around of tennis, if the weather's good. I think all of those outdoor things that, a lot of us have gravitated to for social activities, this last year and a half. I think about those as networking alternatives as well. Go for a walk with somebody, go sit in, the, square in front of the St. Francis.
I love those things.
I mean, I was just say Iser Amper, our sponsor for this month, has historically done an outdoor activity on Sunday morning, which I thought was brilliant, even pre-COVID, right? And that's something you can certainly pick up and do this year as well.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, we've always done our fun run on Monday morning up to the right, and Derek, but we're not doing it this year just because of COVID. And but we have a pharma company that's going to do a run across the Golden Gate Bridge.
Oh, really?
Which will be fun,
awesome.
that we're organizing. So we'll get you the details when our thing comes out on that.
Oh, that's great. I'll definitely do that. No, your Monday morning run was a staple for me for a long time, because it basically, it helps reset your clock. There's always a good group of people that go. There were some people that could really run that would go to your morning that morning run. You kind of you would be ready to kind of get moving in the morning, and then you'd get somebody that's basically a high level triathlete that's running 6-minute miles. The other one that I thought was always good is when Luke Timmerman did his first expedition, I think it was to Everest, he ran a networking thing where people could actually go climb the highest street in San Francisco with him, and he had the backpack loaded with all the weight and everything. But I've always loved the idea of alternative networking events where you're not just sitting around and drinking a cup of coffee or anything like that. So I think that's terrific. And it keep going. Yeah. It's one of the things that gets you out of your element, and doing things that aren't based in a conference room is a great way to get people to remember what you did and who you did it with.
Yeah.
Right. Breaking up
Oh, for sure.
that monotony of sitting in a conference room and looking at someone's slide deck. So this is actually a good transition. So thinking about the fact that the people that you're going to try and be talking to, you know, they're going to basically be more or less locked in a room that seems like a basement for the better part of 3 or 4 days. You know, how do you think about talking to your clients about how do you stand out? How do you make your clients be memorable and make the actual things that you do at JP Morgan count?
Kari, you got
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, again, it comes back to, you know, thinking about your message and your positioning. So that's, you know, one of the things that MacDougall is known for is our positioning meetings, and, you know, how we like to take a step back and look at a company story, company science, you know, the opportunities in the field that they're in, and, you know, look at that in the context of, you know, what are their competitors and peers doing? You know, what are the milestones that they're going to have to build value? Really thinking about your story in, you know, a disciplined way can really help those differentiators stand out to you, so that you can be very thoughtful and intentional about how you communicate them. And I think one of the mistakes that we see is, you know, companies kind of, you know, dive right into the technical science way too early in their presentation. Yeah, don't do that. Really, like, you're going to lose people, and that's even if you get to sort of one of those memorable things later on in your presentation, if you've lost them off the bat, it's going to be a lot harder to bring somebody back. So I would say, you know, kind of put yourself in context, you know, of an opportunity, and make sure your differentiators are communicated right up front. You know, that classic value proposition slide. There's a reason why, you know, you see so many presentations following that model. That will help to set the stage and kind of get somebody interested and engaged. You want somebody to be able to make a connection to what you and your company are doing, and see that spark of what it is that might be different, and for those questions to come, right? The whole point is for there to be a dialogue, and if you're getting questions, there's interest, and that's a good thing.
Yeah.
It's all about the story. It's all about having a really good elevator pitch when you're at these receptions, so that people can understand what you do in real, when they ask you, what does your company do? And not go into a you know, diatribe of long stuff, and just be repeating that over and over again. It's really about building that story, building that brand, figuring out a way to say it very succinctly, so that everybody understands it, and the real value proposition of what you're doing, and just getting it out there. And, you know, also, as I like to do, is that I don't know if there's going to be that many receptions this year, but I always told my team and my clients as well, don't go in packs to these events and stand around and talk to each other. You know, you see teams of biotech companies of all the C-level staff talking to each other at an event where they should be getting, you know, we make it a challenge of how many business cards can you get. And that is a great way to, you know, force yourself to introduce yourself to people.
Yeah.
So I think it'll be a little different this year, because it's going to be tougher to be on the streets, and it's going to be a little bit tougher to, you know, those lobbies might be not as full. And I'm also hearing that that JP Morgan may not be letting a lot of people out of the hotel because of the crime problems they're having there. So it's going to be harder to get in and out. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think building on what you said, I think it's important, especially for, you know, folks that haven't really gone before, to realize that, you know, in a lot of ways, your introductions are just that, right? This is actually an introduction, and there's stuff that's going to follow it, because in the progression, in a lot of ways, is you go, you meet people, you have these meetings, and the folks that are interested, they go back with their team. And what's frustrating sometimes is much of February is folks that tell you they're quote unquote digging out from JP Morgan. So they now have this mountain of emails and mountains of things that they have to schedule. So, you know, almost one of the things, if your purpose, like you said, Kari, if your purpose is, are you raising money? Are you meeting with investors? Or even if you're starting deal conversations. Your next conversation or your next meeting should be something where you actually entice them to then, you know, get the group around and then meet the people that you are really going to go deeper with.
Yeah.
Right. I would imagine that the follow-up and what comes after JP Morgan is just as important, if not more so, than what you do while you're actually there.
And I will also argue that the startup of trying to get the meetings yourself and calling people and tweeting that you're there and stuff like that, that's actually marketing your organization. And people say, you know, to ask us to go get them a group of meetings, and we'll say, sure, but it's really late. But just the fact we're not going to be able to get you that many, but the fact that we're actually blasting you out there and marketing your organization ahead of time is an opportunity, because maybe these people will then remember you in future times. So think of the outreach as marketing your organization too, even if you say get a lot of no's.
Yep. So one of the things that I saw a couple of years ago, this is a really great example. So Jen Horanjeff, who's the CEO of Savvy Cooperative, was on a panel on a Sunday, and you know, her organization basically helps people connect with patients to put the patient voice into R&D and innovation. And she went on to the panel in, you know, wearing a hospital gown and talked about her experience as a patient. And this led to Medium posts, LinkedIn, marketing, a whole bunch of stuff afterwards that built a whole big presence about the stuff that she did while she was there. So in addition to being there and getting in-person meetings, there's a whole lot of other things that you can actually do to raise the profile of your company.
Yep.
We've actually had several questions that have come in from the audience about the biotech showcase, seed showcase, and what you are hearing for the our early stage conferences, A, going forward, and B, are people planning to participate in person? What are you hearing from your networks?
As far as biotech showcase goes, as far as I know, they're planning on doing a kind of a hybrid event. I think in person JP Morgan week and some virtual elements the week following. So
I literally,
you know,
just texted Sarah Demi, and she said yes, we're going to be in person. So I figured I would get it from the horse's mouth this morning.
Great.
Good.
So some of the other events I'm not as sure about, you know, in terms of the smaller company events. I know, again, I think, you know, this is still maybe more biased towards the, you know, smaller public companies, but I think H.C. Wainwright was planning on having their, you know, corporate access event. And you know, a lot of other things, you know, I think are looking to be, you know, potentially virtual, happening like the week prior, or, you know, towards the end of the week or the week following. So like last year, I would expect this to be more like, you know, JPM month versus JPM week.
Positives and negatives.
H.C. Wainwright is going to be, I believe, virtual, and a lot of pharma companies are doing both virtual as well, full virtual. So, they're still reaching out to talk to people during that week.
Yeah,
right.
They're also over the last probably 5 years or so, there's been a greater number of you know, Asian crossover events as well. I don't know if we're going to see those virtual, or if we're going to see more of those in person this year. I imagine if everything is cut back, I imagine some of that will be virtual, but I don't know if you've heard about those as well.
We have not seen those pop up on the radar as we would normally see them so far. I think a lot of people in Europe and Asia are very concerned about getting stuck in the US. Okay, so don't think we're going to see a lot of our European clients are not coming for that perspective. You know, if travel restrictions happen, especially with this new variant, which they don't know, so people are really kind of a wait and see in a lot of the perspectives on that perspective. So
yeah, those are some of the things that I don't think happened virtually last year. You know, a lot of those events, we're trying to track down information, so hopefully we'll have those updates in a couple of weeks with our event calendar.
So
you should also know the international organization is doing you know, virtual meetings, or anywhere you want meetings. Their system is being set up to do as basically a system to set up your meetings. And they will provide you space if you want space, but you can click on virtual or not. So it's anywhere in the world, essentially, partnering system. And I believe the ABD group, which is the Biotech Showcase system, is very similar.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, it's like a 20,
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost like a 24-hour calendar, right? And they're
It's
able
like a
to,
24-hour calendar. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone wants to meet with me at 3 a.m., but you know.
Well, that was the nice part about JP Morgan, is you got everybody on the same time zone. That was really important about that, you know, because we have clients all over the world, and it's really nice to sit down one-on-one with people. And I'm sure, you know, having everybody on the same time zone, that was the real value of the conference.
Yeah. Yeah,
Now that we've been global. Yeah.
I don't know. I think just based on what you just said, I think we'll hit on it again, especially for folks that are going for the first time. There are tools out there to help you be prepared this year. So as much as everything is up in the air, if you can actually get most of your meetings grounded, figure out what you're going to do, and prepare ahead of time, you're going to be much better off. So Bernard Fallon from Bio just actually posted Bio's system for in-person and virtual meetings into the chat. And I would just encourage everybody to really take the time now to set yourself up as best as you can. It will probably change, but I will also say that from the standpoint of the people that you're meeting with, your preparation comes across, right? It's one of those first impressions where, you know, if you make it easy to meet with you and you're already prepared and set up, those are the kind of things that resonate with the folks that you're going to meet with.
Yeah. My understanding with those systems is you have to buy into them, so you are limited to the people that have bought in for meetings. But I also believe that investors can sign up for these systems for free if they're legitimate investors. So you can ask for a meeting to the system, but then you got to ask the investor to sign up, which is there's a fair amount of work to do so. But I think there's an ability to set up those types of meetings.
Yep.
And one nice thing about Biosystem is that people are used to it, you know, from using it, particularly heavily the virtual component, well, in person, right? I mean, Bio used their pretty good, I would argue, partnering system for in person, but then it obviously were able to switch it to virtual over the last 2 years.
But then you've got all the pharmas using their own partnering systems, which are MeetMax or sometimes other systems that are out there. So and the banks are using their own systems. So, but those are all opportunities to get the name of your company out there into system.
You know, it's almost no different than Zoom, right? As a smaller company, you reach out and say, hi, I would like to use Zoom, and then the person that you're meeting with says, we would really still like to meet with you. However, we use this other thing over here because this is what our IT department says is fine, right? At the end of the day, you get the meeting, and maybe you deal with some IT stuff on the back end, but really getting the meeting is the important part. So I have one more live update from Sarah Demi, as she says that the big news for the Biotech Showcase is that the Digital Medicine Showcase and the China Showcase have all moved into the Hilton, so that all of those conferences are going to be under one roof this year, and all of them are going to have in-person elements during that week. So switching gears just slightly, we've talked a lot about folks that are looking for investments. I think there's another flavor of meetings that go on at JP Morgan, and that's the folks at startups that are actually on the corp dev track. People are looking to establish either partnerships, licensing, or other sorts of business development deals. So if we think about those companies, right, you know, what are some of the better practices, you know, this year and kind of every year in terms of what they need to do in terms of how they communicate their data, and in terms of how they set themselves up for these kind of meetings at JP Morgan. So in some ways, you've actually already started your conversations. You may be a little bit down that road. How do folks that are already kind of in the middle of those discussions, how would you think about carrying on those meetings this year?
Good question. Yeah, if it's not an introduction, I think you have to be really intentional about what that incremental disclosure is going to be. In terms of your data. And if you're not ready, I would say don't force yourself to share something just because of this meeting. You really want to make sure that your data is ready for prime time if you're gonna put it out there. because again, like, that company, you have that kind of one shot to build your story. And if you're giving them something half-baked, they're going to see through that.
Yeah.
Yep.
And pharma is very well known for tire kicking, as we say, to really kind of get an understanding of what's out there so that they're prepared to make the deal and cut the deal when the data are there. So that's why they've also all got very extensive business development people and analysts behind the scenes and do want to get to know what you're doing, not just for potentially deal with them, but from a competitive perspective as well. So just be very careful as you're talking to these and you don't want to start off with confidential decks and don't put confidential at the bottom of your deck, by the way, because then they won't look at it, even though it's not confidential. So you want to have special decks for these guys that don't have to talk about the management team and the investors and all that other stuff. It's really about the data and the program and the markets that they believe in and mode of action and all that other cool stuff. So you got to be very specific to their interests when you're out there. It's not a general pitch. So pharma pitches are, especially the new in the door pitches, are different. They should all come to the different the positioning of your company that we talked about earlier, but they may be a little more focused on the product themselves that people are looking at. At the end of the day, when they buy your company, usually that's because they like the product, but it's cheaper to buy the whole company. So don't go out there selling your whole company all the time.
Yeah. One of the things I forget where I read this, but it's nice to look out for what people call the yeahs. So when when you're actually going through your presentation and you see the nodding of the head and almost the thing where they're saying, yeah, I got to the next one. Like you said, you kind of want to get into the places where people are actually interested here.
Yeah.
One of the other things that I found really useful, and this goes back to what you said before about networking with your peers, is the folks that basically could tell you a little more about who's tire kicking and who's actually interested or how to find those kind of people. And especially if you're a younger person, either as a founder or as a BD person, getting the wherewithal to understand when people may be, taking your meeting for informational purposes or whatever, just so you have an understanding of who you're meeting with and why, and kind of some expectations, because it's really kind of eye-opening, and not necessarily in a bad way, but really just to kind of get to know where you fit in with the landscape. And in a lot of ways, doing that stuff in person is actually far more valuable. It gets people, you're a little more likely to break down the barriers and get people to actually tell you some things like that if you're in person and perhaps not in a basement conference room somewhere.
Right.
Derek, you're right on that. Trying to connect with people and figure out how to connect with them beyond just the pitch is really important. In my early days, when I was starting the company, is I put not only a database of all the VCs, but their bios. And so if I had a client that was looking to meet a VC and he had a PhD in chemistry from MIT, I could go into my database and look for all the VCs that had PhDs in chemistry out of MIT. And guess what? They wanted to chat with these people because they were alumni friends or things like that. And they were personal connections. There's many different ways to do that. So definitely, as you get a meeting with someone, is look at their biography and their background, their LinkedIn, and look for some personal connections before that meeting, because that really makes the meeting a little more memorable than just seeing you guys as the 5th targeted protein degradation company, but this guy that I actually knew back in X amount of years. So.
Yep. Do your research, not just for the person you're meeting with too, but if you have connections to, people on their SAB or on their board of directors, founders, it's that broader network and connections, and that's what brings people together. So look for those sort of areas of commonality.
And when you start a meeting that way, like with so-and-so said to be sure to say hello to you or whatever, it immediately relaxes. People are like, okay. And then it becomes, I think everyone's more receptive to the information once they're a little more relaxed.
It is. Very good way to start a meeting. And when you start a meeting, it's also really good to set up an agenda. And so you've got the person on the phone, they say, thank you for meeting with me. You know, how much time would you like me to send for Q&A? Would you like me to go into the deck right away? You know, can you tell me a little bit about, would you like to tell me a little bit about your firm first? People love to talk about themselves. How much time do you want to spend on this? That's a great way to start off a meeting, because then you understand that, you know, that they really wanted to go into Q&A. First, or they may have questions right away and you don't even present your deck because they've done a lot of research on you already.
Right.
So it's a great way to start a meeting.
And as you said earlier, the deal is done in the, you know, in the back and forth, right? So that may be the most productive use of everybody's time if they've done their homework. And
I just from a communications perspective, a little tip is the best slideshows are the ones where people ask the right questions at the end of the day that you can knock out of them. Okay, you don't need to put everything in your presentation. The Q&A is where the deal is signed. A good example is your IP. Assume, you know, if you're selling something in this industry and asking $1 million, there's got to be some decent IP on it. There's no reason to put a slide in there for that, because you know that question is going to happen, either come then or come during the due diligence. And so there's certain things that are very obvious that you know they're going to ask the question. If you can tee up your slideshow that first question is going to knock it, like, how are you different from the competition versus doing it ahead of time? You've got that backup slide to knock it out of the park versus being proactive. If you know the question's coming, wait for the Q&A to knock it out of the park.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen 4 companies just like you this week. What makes you different? And then if you actually have a good answer to that, then you're on the right track. And you know, almost no one has ever put in there, yeah, this is our IP, but honestly, it's not the best. Like, we need to add more here, you know, but we can talk, you know, we'll send you a list of patents. The university ones weren't great, but we're trying to add more. You know?
Right.
So
for sure.
a slightly more challenging question, right? So if you have a company that's operating in stealth mode, and this can be either, you know, in the context of JP Morgan or not, how do you talk to people about your company when you're not ready to say that much about your company? How do you retain the idea of what your company is trying to do and get people interested without kind of giving away the things that you're trying not to give away?
Yeah. You know, so I would say, you know, a couple of things to that. If you're truly in stealth mode, perhaps JP Morgan isn't at the top of your list in terms of priorities. There may be, you know, internal work that really needs to be done first. You know, companies that really are trying to stay in stealth, you know, shouldn't be out there, you know, kind of saying too much at a meeting like JP Morgan. But I think, you know, thinking about that high level positioning, you know, that kind of general elevator pitch about your company, you know, perhaps, you know, that is where you start. You're kind of just, you know, networking yourself, you know, networking the idea of what you're trying to build, and really not going any further than that positioning statement. But if you've done it effectively, and it really captures the excitement and sort of vision for what it is that you're trying to build, you know, that can be enough, especially for these discussions that are, you know, very quick blips and introductions. To see an entrepreneur that is excited about building something, you know, perhaps you know, are able to, you know, talk about 1 or 2, you know, initial investors who are backing, or that you're building something with, you know, a well-known academic founder, you know, that can be enough to spark interest and kind of satisfy, you know, the purpose of an introduction, and give you the opportunity to go back when you're ready to say more.
Yeah, and as Kari said, have really good positioning of who you are, and that's part of the exercise we do with clients, is get that paragraph together. And sometimes we'll keep company stealth for a year, but that paragraph is the only thing on a 1-page website. And you know, make it interesting where you can at least get people that say, well, when you're ready, I want to talk to you. So if you're doing synthetic DNA or synthetic biology, which is kind of cool these days, of DNA writing and stuff like that, you can just throw that out there, that we're building a whole company around this new technology and what's happening. And we're not going to disclose everything that's happening, you know, that we're doing, but when we're ready to raise capital or we're ready to partner, I'd love to, get to know you and give you a call. So,
Yeah.
you can throw some bombs out there that might be of interest to people, but don't get into the details as well.
Right.
It's almost like that old the building, the old days where Bluetooth was being done. Is you knew something was cool being done, but you didn't know exactly what it was, and it was relevant to proximal communications, but that's it. So there's ways to go out there and kind of promote the coolness of what you get doing and not have to make a full announcement as well.
Yeah. So we've been in the era of kind of big financings, and I would say big ideas for a while now. Is there any end in sight to this? I mean, all of the big funds kind of raised even more money. Are we ever really going to see the end of the $50 or $100 million Series A deal, or is that here to stay?
It's harder to raise $20 million than $100 million. Okay.
Yeah.
And it's a fact of generally the size of the funds that have been out there. If you're managing $3 or $4 billion, and some of these VCs are at that height, but the funds are now 700 million plus, they can't have more than 15, 20 portfolio companies. So you divide that up, and that comes into the hundreds of millions of dollars, or minimum of 50 or 20 that each has to put in to be able to manage it, because they can't have a lot of little guys because they just can't manage all the portfolio companies. Same with the public company funds too, Fidelities and stuff like that. They can't have 500 different companies. Their analysts can't follow them and oversee them. So it's that the age of it getting bigger is just going to happen because there's so much capital out there. There's some new sources more coming in of foundations and people like that. But at the end of the day, we need to develop or raise $400 or $500 million to kind of get a product into the clinic and get proof of concept these days. So I think people are realizing that, and the size of the funds is what's driving it, and the amount of capital.
Yeah. Well, I hope we could be slightly more efficient than $400 or $500 million to get a product into the clinic. I think we can shoot for a little better than
$400 or $500 to maybe get proof of concept, which is a phase 2B.
Yeah. That's still a lot. So even then, if you're thinking about if you're almost a newly public company, right? Do you think we ever see a reset in terms of what the real kind of valuation drivers are now, right? Because I mean, again, you have these companies whose largest asset is cash, and who are sitting at these larger market caps, who haven't really, certainly haven't reached proof of concept yet, but are kind of just getting into the clinic. Do you think we actually are resetting the bar in terms of what biotech company value looks like? Or do you see anything where eventually a good group of investors steps back and says, wait a minute, for the amount this company is worth, we should actually see some proof of concept data here?
Yeah, this is a depends answer. Because there are platform companies, right, where you need that amount of capital to really, realize the value of what it is that you have, and you need that sort of perfect match, right, between the time to let your platform mature and to test it, and then the serendipity, opportunities for it to really shine. We definitely saw that with Moderna, right? So I think there, that element, I think, is here to stay, in terms of the size, the valuations, and for the companies that really, can do something over and over again and really create, a lot of value over time. I think as long as they start, delivering in a reasonable time frame, I think, we're going to be okay. I think we're also seeing, right, that time to proof of concept shrink for a lot of companies, and so that's part of the rationale for these bigger preclinical valuations is it's not 10 years to 5 to 10 years to proof of concept, but maybe 2. So if we see that to start to break down, I might be a little concerned, but for now, I think there is a lot of change that substantiates some of what we're seeing in the markets.
Yeah. And we are seeing a wave that always happens is when valuations start getting heavy on the therapeutic companies, is that they start moving to the platform companies, and they start moving to the picks and shovel companies that are supporting the biotech industry, whether they're developing enzymes or manufacturing or things like that. So that wave is happening now. Those companies are doing very well. And another thing right now is there is the overhang of pricing. Investors are concerned about investing in later stage therapeutic companies because there's a huge amount of difference on what the net present value would be based on what Congress might do on those products. But the companies that are platform companies, you can't put that net present value yet on, and they may be 5 years away from having that to be able to which hopefully the overhang of pricing might be an issue. So it's really getting in the minds of those investors and what they're doing. There's tons of capital, and that's the problem. It's got to move around. They can't turn around and go invest in tech because they built their firms around biotech. So I think we'll do well, but we'll see people moving back and forth within different sectors within the within the industry.
Yeah, and even the risk to early stage companies for sort of the capital limiting of the federal bill is that at some point those products will be on the market and they will be captured by rules that set the prices, right? So so that affects valuation, maybe not today, but certainly down the road.
But the investors are looking at that for sure. And then you've got all the money coming in from Asia as well, and that's really boosting up stuff too. We have a lot of companies that are coming out of China that are putting in offices in the U.S. and want to be U.S. offices, but are funded sometimes 100% by Chinese investors. And there's a lot of good quality investors over there. So.
And just so, I mean, I think this goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway because I'm a lawyer by training. But New York Bio and Bio at the national level are obviously working to impact positively what comes out of Congress, right? So we're advocating on behalf of biotech companies to try and achieve a result that is more rational than what's been considered to date.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think when you look at all of the capital that's out there, you look at things like Moderna, you look at all of these other companies that have been started in and around data. I think one of the things that I'm excited about over the next 10 years is we're getting much smarter about how to use data to make better therapies, how to think about, making therapies for specific groups of patients. And I only see that trend continuing, right? So I think pricing aside, I think if we just think about the science that people are doing within this industry, it's going to be tremendously impactful. And we've done a lot in the last 10 years. I think the next 10 years is going to be really exciting for what we can do.
It will be. Cell therapy is going to be something that's really impacting this industry. You can get proof of concept in 2 years with cell therapy these days, and that because you can put them into patients through the academics are putting actually these things in patients, and then you can go straight into a pivotal trials and stuff. So I think that industry with the picks and shovels that are needed, the manufacturing, the distribution, the commercialization, and the products themselves, I think are going to make a huge impact on patients quickly in this industry. So that's something that's great to look forward to.
Doug and Kari, thank you so much for being our guest today. We will all be looking forward to the publication of the JPM calendar on your website. But most importantly, we appreciate your expertise and the conversation today. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much for inviting us. Yep.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day,
everyone.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to NewYorkBIO's virtual breakfast series. Join us every Tuesday at 9 a.m. for more discussions with leaders from across the healthcare spectrum. For more information on NewYorkBIO, please visit us at www.newyorkbio.org.